The air on Calavigny Island tasted of salt and betrayal. One moment, Hayley Devereux was the pregnant, adored wife of a tech billionaire. The next, she was a spectacle of public humiliation. Under the glittering lights of his lavish party, her husband, Sebastian, didn't just end their marriage. He detonated it. With his mistress clinging to his arm, he publicly renounced Hayley and the child she carried, leaving her stranded on his private paradise as a tropical storm gathered on the horizon. He thought he had erased her, but he made one fatal mistake. He left her alive. The journey to Calavigny Island began not with the gentle hum of the Gulf Stream G650, but with the subtle, chilling click of a platinum lighter. Sebastian Devereux lit his Cuban cigar, the cherry glowing like a malevolent eye in the jet's dim cabin. He didn't offer one to his associates, and he didn't look at his wife, Hayley, who sat across from him, her hands resting protectively on the swell of her 5-month pregnancy. "It has to be perfect, Jenna," he said, his voice a low baritone that had charmed boardrooms and investors into handing over fortunes. The smoke he exhaled coiled towards the ceiling. "This party isn't just a party. It's a statement. It's the culmination of the Ethelred acquisition. Everyone who is anyone will be there. We need to project unassailable strength." Hayley managed a small smile. "Everything you do is perfect, Seb." It was the answer he expected, the one she had learned to give. Their life was a meticulously curated exhibition of success, and she was its most beautiful, most serene installation. They had met 3 years prior at a Sotheby's auction. She was a junior art consultant, advising a client on a minor Degas sculpture. He wasn't bidding. He was buying the auction house. He'd been captivated by her quiet intelligence and the way she spoke about art, with a passion that felt alien in his world of algorithms and market capitalizations. For Hayley, a woman raised by a university professor and a librarian in a quiet corner of Connecticut, Sebastian was a force of nature. His ambition was a gravitational pull she couldn't resist. He'd showered her with a life ripped from the pages of a luxury magazine, a penthouse overlooking Central Park, a villa in Lake Como, and a wardrobe that cost more than her parents' house. He loved her, she believed, for being his anchor, his peace in a world of cutthroat competition. But the gilded cage, no matter how opulent, was still a cage. Her opinions on art were now used to decorate his corporate lobbies. Her friends with their normal jobs and mortgages were politely phased out in favor of his circle of venture capitalists, socialites, and tech titans. He had even chosen the dress she was to wear tonight, a flowing seafoam green gown by a designer she'd never heard of, one that was meant to showcase her pregnancy in the most elegant, non-threatening way possible. "The Beaumonts are arriving just after us." Sebastian continued scrolling through his phone, his thumb moving with ruthless efficiency. "Blake Beaumont is a potential board member for the new conglomerate. His wife, Victoria. She can be a bit much, but she's influential. Be charming to her." Hayley's smile tightened. Victoria Beaumont, a woman sculpted from marble and disdain, who looked at Hayley as if she were a charming but ultimately temporary pet. Victoria was from Sebastian's world, old money, predatory ambition, and a shared history that was often hinted at but never clarified. The jet began its descent, breaking through a layer of pillowy clouds to reveal a turquoise expanse dotted with emerald islands. In the center, like a jewel, was Calavigny. It was Sebastian's ultimate status symbol, an 80-acre private island in the Grenadines that he'd purchased for an obscene sum. He'd spent 2 years and $100 million transforming it into his personal fiefdom, a paradise of Balinese-style villas private beaches, and manicured jungle paths. As the plane touched down on the private airstrip, the cabin door opened to a wall of humid, fragrant air. A fleet of custom golf carts waited to whisk them to the main residence, a sprawling architectural masterpiece named the Overlook. Staff in crisp white uniforms lined the path, their heads bowed. It was a royal welcome. "Remember, Jenna?" Sebastian murmured, his hand on the small of her back, his touch feeling more like a positioning than a caress. Flawless. "Tonight we are untouchable." She nodded the baby inside her, giving a gentle kick a secret reassurance. She walked beside her husband into the heart of the magnificent home. The sound of a string quartet already drifting from the grand terrace. Guests were beginning to arrive, their laughter mingling with the clinking of champagne flutes. Everything was bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. It was, by all accounts, perfect. But as a grey bank of clouds began to mass on the distant horizon, Haley felt a shiver of unease, a premonition as dark and foreboding as the coming storm. The perfect world Sebastian had built felt impossibly fragile, like a house of cards waiting for a single, malicious puff of wind. She was about to find out that the wind was already in the room, and it was wearing Victoria Beaumont's smile. The party was an exercise in calculated excess. An oyster bar featured mollusks flown in from 5 different countries. A vodka luge carved from a single block of ice into a replica of Sebastian's corporate logo was the centerpiece of the main bar. Tech billionaires mingled with European aristocrats and supermodels, laughed with grizzled hedge fund managers. Haley played her part, a gracious hostess, floating through the crowd, her hand never far from her belly. She saw Sebastian across the infinity pool, locked in conversation with Blake and Victoria Beaumont. Victoria was dazzling in a crimson dress that seemed to defy gravity. She laughed at something Sebastian said, placing a perfectly manicured hand on his arm and letting it linger just a moment too long. Haley had seen that gesture 100 times, a casual mark of territory that set her teeth on edge. She told herself it was just the paranoia of pregnancy. She turned to greet a senator from New York, discussing a recent museum gala when she felt a presence behind her. "You're glowing," Victoria purred, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. "Pregnancy suits you. It's so domestic." Haley forced a smile. "Thank you, Victoria. I see you're enjoying the party." "Oh, it's a Sebastian Devereaux party." "They're always legendary," Victoria replied, her eyes scanning Haley from head to toe. "That's a lovely color on you. Did Sebastian pick it out?" He always had such specific tastes. The implication was clear. Another subtle jab to remind Haley of her place. Before she could respond, a low rumble echoed from across the sea. The wind picked up, rustling the palm fronds and making the paper lanterns dance violently. The sky, once a canvas of pastel sunset hues, was now a bruised purple. "Looks like we're in for a show," Victoria said with a smirk, seemingly unbothered. An hour later, the show began. The storm hit not with a gentle prelude, but with a sudden, furious onslaught. Rain came down in blinding sheets, driving the guests from the exposed terraces into the cavernous main hall of the Overlook. The string quartet was replaced by the roar of the wind and the percussive crash of waves against the cliffs below. The lights flickered, casting the panicked faces of the elite in a strobe-like effect. In the ensuing chaos, Haley searched for Sebastian. She found him near the grand fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand, looking utterly calm. He was with Victoria again. Blake was nowhere to be seen. Seb the staff is trying to get everyone to the storm shelters in the guest villas. Haley said, her voice tight with anxiety. We should coordinate, he cut her off. His eyes cold and distant. Everything is under control, Haley. Go and rest. You look pale. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a dismissal. Hurt and confused, she began to walk away, but his next words stopped her dead. She knows, Vic. It's time. The words were a low murmur, but in a sudden lull in the storm's fury, they carried across the marble floor with perfect, devastating clarity. Haley turned back slowly. Victoria was looking at her, a triumphant, pitying smile on her face. Sebastian's expression was unreadable, a mask of stone. Knows what Seb, Haley asked, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. What's going on? Sebastian sighed, a theatrical sound of weary impatience. He took a step forward, and the small crowd that had been huddled nearby fell silent, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. The drama of the storm outside was nothing compared to the tempest brewing within the walls of the Overlook. This, he said, gesturing vaguely between himself and Haley. This arrangement, it has run its course. Haley's blood ran cold. Arrangement? You mean our marriage? I mean, the charade. He corrected his voice, rising, capturing the attention of everyone in the room. He was performing now. This was his stage. I needed a certain image for the Ethelred deal. A stable, traditional man. You played that part beautifully, I'll admit. A collective gasp went through the audience of his peers. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Haley felt her face flush with heat, 100 pairs of eyes on her, dissecting her humiliation. The deal is done. Sebastian continued, his voice devoid of any emotion. My company is secure, and I no longer require the props. Props. Her voice was a choked whisper. She looked down at her own hands, resting on the life inside her. Is that what your son is to you? A prop. Sebastian laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the high-ceilinged room. My son? Oh, Haley, you are delightfully naive. I have my lawyers the best in the world. They've raised some very interesting questions about the timeline of your pregnancy, about your fidelity. The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was a lie, a monstrous, baseless lie. But he said it with such conviction that doubt flickered in the eyes of the onlookers. He was poisoning the well, destroying her reputation to ensure his own clean getaway. That's not true, she breathed, shaking her head in disbelief. You know that's not true. Does it matter? He shot back. I'm Sebastian Devereux. My truth is the one that gets printed. He then turned and took Victoria's hand, pulling her to his side. He held her hand up for all to see. Victoria and I are going to be together. It's been a long time coming. She understands my world. She belongs in it. Victoria looked at Haley, her eyes gleaming with victory. She had won. You will be given a severance, Sebastian said, as if firing a disloyal employee. Generous, of course. You'll sign a non-disclosure agreement, and you will disappear quietly. My jet will take you back to the mainland in the morning after the storm passes. The staff will show you to a guest room. He turned his back on her, a final, brutal act of dismissal. He had just executed her socially and emotionally in front of the most powerful people he knew. Stranded pregnant and publicly branded an unfaithful, disposable wife, Haley stood frozen in the center of the room. The lights flickered again, and then died, completely plunging the hall into darkness, save for the frantic beams of staff flashlights and the periodic terrifying flashes of lightning from outside. In that moment of absolute darkness, a tear finally escaped and traced a path down her cheek. It felt as hot as acid. The gilded cage hadn't just opened. It had been vaporized, and she was left falling with no ground in sight. The darkness was a perverse mercy. It hid the smirks, the pitying glances, the avid curiosity on the faces of the guests. A member of the staff, a young woman named Sophia, whose kindness had always seemed genuine, gently touched Haley's arm. "Ma'am, let me take you to your room. It's not safe here." Haley allowed herself to be led away, moving like a sleepwalker through the opulent halls that now felt like a mausoleum. The room they took her to was not her own. It was a sterile, impersonal guest suite at the far end of the estate, as far from Sebastian as possible. Sophia lit some candles, her expression full of a sorrow she couldn't voice. "Is there anything I can get you?" "Mrs. Devereux." The name was a slap. "Don't call me that," Haley whispered, her voice raw. "My name is Haley McClellan." Reclaiming her maiden name was the first act of defiance, a tiny spark in the crushing darkness. Sophia nodded and quietly left, closing the door behind her. Haley was alone with the roaring storm and the ruins of her life. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her body trembling. The baby kicked a frantic, insistent rhythm, as if sensing its mother's distress. She wasn't just heartbroken. She was terrified. Sebastian's lie about her fidelity wasn't just a cruel parting shot. It was a strategic move to disown their child, to absolve himself of all responsibility, to paint her as a gold-digging fraud. He controlled the media, the lawyers, the narrative. If she stayed, she'd be trapped in a public relations war she couldn't possibly win. He would crush her. She and her child would be footnotes in the story of his glorious rise, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. She couldn't let that happen. Her child deserved more than a life lived in the shadow of Sebastian's lies. An idea, wild and desperate, began to form. Disappear. Not just leave, but vanish. He expected her to take his severance and slink away broken. He would never expect her to simply cease to exist. The storm was her cover. The chaos was her opportunity. Driven by a surge of adrenaline-fueled clarity, Haley stood up. She couldn't take anything that belonged to him. Not the designer clothes in the closet, not the jewels in the safe. She took off the 7-carat diamond ring he'd placed on her finger and set it on the nightstand. It felt like removing a shackle. She was wearing only the seafoam green gown, now damp and stained. It would have to do. She went to the window. It overlooked a steep garden path that led down towards a small private cove, one rarely used by guests. The rain was relentless, turning the manicured landscape into a treacherous river of mud. It was dangerous, but staying was a death sentence of a different kind. Taking a deep breath, she slipped out of the villa. The wind tore at her, plastering the thin fabric of her dress to her body. She was instantly soaked to the bone. Her hair whipped across her face, blinding her. She half ran, half slid down the muddy path, grabbing onto tree trunks and roots to keep from falling. Thorns tore at her dress and her skin. The perfect paradise had become a hostile wilderness. She reached the cove. The waves were monstrous, crashing against the rocks with a terrifying power. A small boat dock used for jet skis and tenders was being battered by the surf. Tied to it was a small inflatable Zodiac boat, its motor covered with a tarp probably left by a maintenance worker who had fled for shelter. It was her only chance. Her fingers were numb with cold as she struggled with the ropes. A massive wave crashed over the dock, nearly sweeping her off her feet. She clung to a piling, her knuckles white. The baby felt like a lead weight in her belly. "We can do this," she thought, a mantra against the screaming wind. "We have to do this." Finally, the last knot gave way. She clambered into the Zodiac, her body screaming with protest. She fumbled with the tarp, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip it. She pulled the cord on the small outboard motor. Nothing. Again. Nothing. Panic began to set in. On the third pull, a wave of desperation lending her strength. The motor sputtered to life with a choked cough. She steered the small boat away from the island into the churning black sea. It was an act of insanity. The Zodiac was tossed about like a toy, cresting massive waves that threatened to swallow it whole. Salt spray stung her eyes, and the roar of the engine was lost in the fury of the storm. She had no idea where she was going, only that she was moving away from Sebastian, away from the life that had tried to destroy her. She didn't know how long she fought the storm. It could have been minutes or hours. Her arms ached, her body was bruised, and a chilling exhaustion was seeping into her bones. The lights of Calavigny Island were long gone. She was a tiny, insignificant speck in a world of violent water and wind. Just as she felt her strength give out, as the engine sputtered and died, a light cut through the rain. It was a beam, powerful and steady, sweeping across the waves. It found her. The beam belonged to a larger vessel, a sturdy-looking yacht that was riding out the storm in the lee of a neighboring smaller island. Men were shouting. A rope ladder was thrown down. Strong hands pulled her from the half-swamped Zodiac onto the deck of the yacht. She collapsed, shivering and incoherent, into the arms of a figure who wrapped her in a thick, dry blanket. She looked up into the face of an old man, with kind, concerned eyes and a shock of white hair. He was a guest from the party she vaguely recalled, an investor from a bygone era, one who had watched the evening's drama unfold with a quiet, thoughtful detachment. "You're safe now, my dear," he said, his voice a calm anchor in the chaos. "My name is Desmond Wallace, and I think it's fair to say your life has just taken a rather dramatic turn. Let's get you warm, and then we can decide what comes next." As she slipped into an exhausted unconsciousness, Hayley McClellan knew one thing for certain. Her old life was over, drowned in the storm. A new one, terrifying and unknown, had just begun. The next 5 years were a lifetime. Hayley awoke on Desmond Wallace's yacht, the Wanderer. Not as a victim, but as a blank slate. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky of impossible blue and a sea as calm as glass. Calavigny Island was a distant smudge on the horizon, a place she vowed never to see again, not as she was. Desmond Wallace was more than just a kind stranger. He was a legend in the world of old money and discreet power. A self-made shipping magnate who had cashed out decades ago, he had watched men like Sebastian Devereux, arrogant, flashy, and ultimately hollow, rise and fall like the tides. He had seen the cruelty at the party, and in Hayley he saw not a broken woman, but a core of tempered steel she didn't yet know she possessed. He made a grave error, Hayley Desmond told her over a cup of tea in his yacht's study. A room panelled in rich mahogany and lined with books. He underestimated you. Men like Devereux always do. They see a beautiful wife, not a brilliant partner. Their ego is their Achilles' heel. He offered her a choice. He could arrange for her to be safely and anonymously returned to the United States with a small trust fund to start over. Or she could stay with him, learn from him, and forge a new identity, a new life on her own terms. Revenge is a fool's game. He said, his gaze steady. But justice is the business of building a better future on the wreckage of the past. He tried to erase you. The greatest justice it is not to haunt him, but to become someone he could never imagine. Haley chose the latter. Her son was born 3 months later in a private clinic in Geneva, Switzerland. She named him Leo for the lion-hearted courage he had given her. Holding him for the first time, she knew she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was building a dynasty for him, a legacy free from the taint of the Devereaux name. Under Desmond's tutelage, Haley McClellan ceased to exist. In her place emerged Haley Monroe, a name chosen for its classic strength. She devoured Desmond's library, learning about global finance, sovereign debt, emerging markets, and corporate law. She had a natural aptitude for seeing patterns, a skill honed during her years studying art history, and she applied it to the complex tapestry of the financial world. Desmond treated her like the daughter he never had. He taught her how to negotiate with sharks, how to leverage debt, how to create shell corporations and offshore accounts, not for evasion, but for protection and strategic advantage. He refined her, sharpening her intellect until it was a weapon. She learned 4 languages. She traveled with him on the Wanderer, sitting in on meetings in Hong Kong, Dubai, and Monaco, a silent observer who absorbed everything. Leo grew up on the yacht, his world a shifting landscape of international ports and the unwavering love of his mother. He had her thoughtful eyes, and to Haley's secret, painful acknowledgement, Sebastian's determined chin. He was smart, resilient, and knew nothing of the father who had disowned him. His father, in every way that mattered, was the kind old man who taught him how to fish off the coast of Greece and read him stories about great explorers. When Leo was 4, Desmond's health began to fail. He had lived a full life and was ready for its final chapter. One afternoon, anchored off the coast of Croatia, he called Haley to his study. "I'm not leaving you a fortune, my dear," he said, his voice weaker now, but still clear. "I'm leaving you an arsenal. The companies, the accounts, the contacts, they are all tools. What you build with them is up to you." He passed away a week later, peacefully in his sleep. His will was simple. The bulk of his vast, labyrinthine estate was left to a charitable foundation, but a significant, strategically chosen portfolio of assets, worth nearly $1 billion if managed correctly, was left to one Haley Monroe. Along with it was a single sealed envelope. Inside was a short letter. "My dearest Haley, I hope I have given you the means to secure your and Leo's future. But I know you. You have a fire in you that peace alone will not quench. There is one piece of unfinished business. I have learned through my network that Sebastian Devereaux is selling Calivigny Island. His tech empire is over-leveraged, and he needs liquid capital. He sees the island as a monument to a past triumph. I see it as a stage. Go and claim it. Not for revenge, but to prove once and for all that the future is not written by the men who build gilded cages, but by the women who learn to fly out of them. Your friend Desmond." Reading the letter, Haley felt a chill run down her spine. The island, the site of her greatest humiliation. For 5 years, She had meticulously built a fortress around her heart, focusing only on the future. But Desmond was right. To truly be free, she had to go back to the beginning. She had to face the ghost of her past. She looked at the financial reports Desmond had left her. She saw the network of holding companies, the web of assets. She began to formulate a plan, not with the desperation of an escaped victim, but with the cold, calculating precision of a corporate raider. Sebastian Devereux thought he had destroyed Haley McClellan 5 years ago in a storm. He had no idea that he had inadvertently forged Haley Monroe in the crucible of his own cruelty. And she was coming back to collect. The sale of Calavigny Island was not a public affair. It was a quiet, discreet offering circulated among the world's ultra-elite through a handful of exclusive brokerage firms in Zurich and London. Sebastian Devereux, true to form, couldn't bear the public humiliation of a fire sale. The official narrative was that he was realigning his portfolio to focus on new philanthropic ventures. It was a lie, and everyone in his circle knew it. His tech company, Ethelred, once the darling of Silicon Valley, was hemorrhaging money. A series of disastrous product launches and a nasty patent lawsuit had eroded investor confidence. The stock was in a death spiral. Sebastian and Victoria's lavish lifestyle, once funded by soaring profits, was now financed by debt. The island was his most liquid, most valuable, non-corporate asset. He needed to sell, and he needed to sell fast. From a quiet, modern office in Geneva, Haley Monroe orchestrated her attack. She was no longer a woman in a seafoam green dress. She was a spectre in the machine, a name on a letterhead that no one could trace back to the wife Sebastian had discarded. She operated through 3 different shell corporations, registered in 3 different countries. A real estate holding firm in the Cayman Islands, a financial services company in Luxembourg, and a consulting group in Delaware. Each was a cutout, a layer of insulation between her and the final transaction. Her lead negotiator was a shrewd, silver-haired Swiss lawyer named Anton Gruber, a man who had been fiercely loyal to Desmond Wallace for 40 years. He never asked about his new client's motives. He only executed her instructions with brutal efficiency. Sebastian's asking price was $150 million. It was inflated based on what he had spent on it, not its current market value. He's sentimental, and he's desperate, Haley told Anton over a secure video call. His ego won't let him accept a low-ball offer, so we won't make one. We will make him feel like he's winning right up until the end. Their first move was to create a competitor. Haley used the Delaware Corporation to put in a deliberately clumsy low offer of $90 million, leaking it to a financial gossip blog. The story framed it as an insult, a sign of Devereux's fallen status. Sebastian, predictably, was enraged. He publicly rejected the offer, his pride forcing him to hold firm on his price. That was when Anton Gruber, representing the Luxembourg firm Orion Capital, entered the picture. He approached Sebastian's brokers with a much more serious offer of $125 million. He was professional, courteous, and projected an air of immense old-world wealth. After the insult of the first bid, Sebastian saw Orion Capital as a serious, respectable buyer. The negotiations dragged on for weeks. Sebastian, squeezed by his creditors, pushed for a higher price. Haley, through Anton, held firm. She knew Sebastian's quarterly earnings report was due to be released, and she had done her homework. It was going to be a bloodbath. The day the disastrous report was published, Ethelred stock plunged another 30%. Sebastian's bankers were calling. The pressure was immense. That same afternoon, Anton received a call. Sebastian would accept the $125 million, but he had one condition: a fast, all-cash closing in under a week, with no contingencies. It was a move designed to weed out anyone who didn't have immediate access to that kind of capital. "He is testing us," Anton told Haley. "He believes no one can move that quickly." "He's right," Haley said with a thin smile. "No one can. But we can." She initiated a complex series of wire transfers, moving funds from various accounts Desmond had left, her routing them through the Cayman Islands holding company, and finally consolidating them in an escrow account managed by Orion Capital in Zurich. It was a symphony of international finance, conducted flawlessly. 5 days later, the deal was ready to close. The final contracts were to be signed. The buyer was listed as Kalivicny Holdings Limited, a subsidiary of Orion Capital. The signatory for the buyer was Anton Gruber. Haley's name was nowhere on the documents. From her office in Geneva, she watched a live feed from the closing room in Zurich. She saw Sebastian Devereux on the screen, looking older and more strained than she remembered. The easy arrogance was gone, replaced by a tense, brittle facade. Victoria was not with him. He signed the documents with a flourish of his pen, a man trying to pretend he was in control of a situation that had spiraled far beyond him. Once his signature was on the page, Anton signed for the buyer. A lawyer nodded. The deal was done. The island was hers. Haley felt no elation, no thrill of victory, just a profound quiet and deeply satisfying sense of completion. It was a transaction. A problem had been solved. A debt had been settled. She leaned back in her chair and looked out the window at Lake Geneva. The first phase of her plan was complete. Now it was time to prepare the stage. She picked up her phone and dialed her new estate manager, a woman hand-picked for her discretion and impeccable taste. "Good morning, Catherine Haley," said her voice, calm and steady. "We can now begin the renovations on the island. I have the guest list for the grand reopening party. I want the invitations sent out by the end of the week. Oh, and Catherine. The new owner wishes to remain anonymous for now. All correspondence should be from GM Enterprises." She hung up the phone. GM Haley Monroe, a name Sebastian Devereux would not recognize. But soon he would. He and everyone else who had watched her fall would be invited back to the scene of the crime. Only this time she wouldn't be the spectacle. She would be the architect. The invitation arrived in a world that had moved on. 5 years is an eternity in the sphere of the ultra-rich. Fortunes are made. Empires crumble. Alliances shift. For Sebastian and Victoria Devereux, the past 5 years had been a slow, grinding descent. The sale of the island had provided a temporary reprieve, but it was like using a teacup to bail out a sinking ship. Ethelred was a shadow of its former self, propped up by risky loans and the sheer force of Sebastian's denial. Their social standing, once unassailable, had become precarious. They were no longer the power couple everyone clamored to be near. They were the couple people whispered about their troubles, a source of delicious gossip. Their marriage, born of ambition and betrayal, had curdled into a partnership of mutual resentment, held together only by a shared fear of losing their status. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a private courier. It was a heavy, cream-colored card, thick as a book cover, with minimalist, embossed gold lettering. There was no gaudy crest, no ostentatious design. Its power lay in its understated elegance. GM Enterprises cordially invites you to celebrate the reawakening of Kalivicny Island. A weekend of tranquility and new beginnings. The date was set for a month away. The details were sparse, promising private jet transport from select global capitals and an experience of unparalleled bespoke luxury. The host was identified only as the island's new anonymous owner. Victoria, her face a carefully maintained mask of cosmetic enhancements, turned the card over in her hands. GM. Enterprises, who the hell is that? Must be some new Russian oligarch or a Saudi prince. Tacky to be so mysterious. Sebastian, however, felt a flicker of something else. Not excitement, but a gnawing curiosity mixed with the bitter tang of loss. Everyone is talking about it, he said, scrolling through his phone. The entire guest list from that night. They all got at one. It's a power play. The new owner is making a statement inviting the old king's court to see the new regime. So we're not going, Victoria stated flatly. The island held nothing but sour memories for her, now a monument to a victory that had ultimately felt hollow. We have to go, Sebastian countered, his voice sharp. Not going would be an admission of defeat. It would be telling the world that we can't stand to see someone else own our old property. It would be weak. We will go, we will smile, we will praise the new owner's taste, and we will act as if selling that rock was the smartest decision we ever made. We have to maintain appearances, Victoria. It's all we have left. And so they accepted, as did everyone else. The mystery was too tantalizing to ignore. For the next month, the sole topic of conversation in their elite circles was the identity of GM. On the appointed day, Sebastian and Victoria boarded a chartered jet, a far cry from their old G650. The other passengers were familiar faces from their past, the same hedge fund managers, socialites, and tech moguls. But the atmosphere was different. The fawning respect they once commanded was gone, replaced by a polite, cool distance. They were no longer the sun around which these people orbited. They were just two more guests. As the jet descended towards the familiar airstrip, Sebastian felt a pit in his stomach. The island looked different, more lush. The main residence, the overlook, had been subtly altered. The stark modernist lines he had favored were softened by cascades of vibrant bougainvillea. The architecture was the same, but the soul of the place felt new. They were greeted not by staff in starchy formal uniforms, but by hosts in elegant flowing linen. The atmosphere was not one of opulent servitude, but of relaxed, confident hospitality. There was no string quartet playing Vivaldi, but the sophisticated ambient tones of a modern electronic composer. Their bags were whisked away to their suite, a guest villa not the owner's residence they had once occupied. It was the very same suite where Haley had been sent after her public humiliation. The irony was so thick it was suffocating, though Sebastian was the only one who seemed to notice. That evening, the welcome reception was held on the main terrace. It mirrored the party from 5 years ago, yet it was an inversion of it. The garish ice sculpture was gone, replaced by a stunning piece of modern art. The food was not a buffet of excess, but a curated selection of exquisite, locally sourced tapas. Everything was better, more tasteful, more confident, more powerful. Sebastian felt a growing sense of unease. This wasn't the work of some new money brute. This was the work of someone with impeccable taste and a deep understanding of psychology. Someone who knew exactly what this place once represented and was systematically dismantling it. He and Victoria mingled, putting on their brave faces, but the whispers were everywhere. Who is GM? Have you seen the new art collection? I heard they bought the island for cash, no financing. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the assembled guests, A woman, the estate manager Catherine, stepped onto a small, discreet stage. "Good evening, everyone, and welcome," she said, her voice amplified just enough to be heard over the gentle music. "On behalf of our host, we are so thrilled you could join us for this special weekend." In a few moments, the owner of this island, the visionary behind GM Enterprises, would like to say a few words. A buzz of anticipation went through the crowd. Everyone craned their necks, looking towards the main entrance of the villa. Sebastian found himself holding his breath. He needed to see the person who had done this, the person who had bought his past and so effortlessly improved upon it. The music softened. The lights on the terrace dimmed slightly, focusing all attention on the empty stage. The moment was pregnant with expectation, and from the shadows of the grand archway, a figure emerged. A woman. She was tall and poised, wearing a simple but exquisitely cut evening gown of deep sapphire blue. Her hair was pulled back, accentuating a face that was both familiar and terrifyingly new. It was a face sculpted by strength, intelligence, and an unshakable, chilling calm. A collective audible gasp rippled through the guests. Victoria's wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the stone terrace. Sebastian felt the blood drain from his face. His heart stopped. He was looking at a ghost. But she was not a ghost. She was real. It was Haley. She walked to the center of the stage, her movements possessing a liquid grace that was utterly captivating. The sapphire dress, a column of midnight silk, seemed to absorb the ambient light, making her the undeniable focal point of the entire terrace. She didn't look angry or triumphant or vengeful. She looked serene, a queen, taking her place on her throne not by conquest but by divine right. Her posture was perfect, her shoulders back radiating a confidence that was so absolute it felt like a physical force. This was not the gentle, accommodating Haley they remembered. This was a woman forged in a fire they couldn't possibly comprehend. A staff member offered her a microphone, but she waited a long, deliberate moment before taking it, letting the silence and the crushing weight of the crowd's shock settle over the terrace. Her eyes, cool and analytical, swept across the sea of stunned, upturned faces. They passed over tech moguls who had once ignored her and socialites who had whispered about her. Finally, her gaze landed on Sebastian and Victoria. She held their stare for a single protracted heartbeat, a moment stretched into an eternity. In that silent, chilling acknowledgement, they knew, with bone-deep certainty, that this was not a coincidence. This was not a chance encounter. This was an appointment, an execution meticulously planned and 5 years in the making. Victoria's manicured fingers tightened on the stem of her wine glass, the crystal groaning under the pressure. Beside her, Sebastian stood utterly frozen, a statue of disbelief carved from ice. The man who always had a plan, always had an angle, was completely, terrifyingly adrift. His mind, usually a supersonic calculator of risk and opportunity, was blank with static. Impossible. It's not her. It's a trick, a ghost. But his heart, hammering against his ribs, knew the truth. "Welcome back to Calavigny Island," Haley finally said. Her voice was not the soft, hesitant tone he remembered. It was richer, deeper, and resonated with an unshakable authority that commanded the attention of every person present. "I see some familiar faces. It's been 5 years. A great deal can change in 5 years." She paused, allowing the profound understatement to land with the force of a physical blow. The whispers began to erupt, a panicked, sibilant sound like dry leaves, skittering across pavement. It's her. My God. It's actually her. How is this possible? Where did she get the money? Sebastian could feel the collective gaze of the crowd shift, flickering between the woman on the stage and him. He was no longer a guest. He was part of the spectacle. The other half of a story, whose ending he had written long ago, only to find the protagonist had returned to pen a final, brutal chapter. Some of you may remember me, she continued, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. It wasn't a smile of warmth, but of supreme, untouchable control, though perhaps in a different context. The last time we were all gathered here on a rather stormy evening, I was the wife of the host. Tonight, she let the words hang in the air, each one a perfectly polished stone dropped into a silent pool. I am simply the host. The implication was a thunderclap. Victoria let out a small, strangled gasp. The wine glass, forgotten in her hand, slipped from her nerveless fingers. It did not shatter on the stone terrace. It landed on the manicured lawn, just beside it, with a dull, muffled thud, a sound of anticlimax that was somehow more unnerving than a crash. I understand there is some curiosity, Haley said, her voice smoothly overriding the rising clamor. Let me be clear. This weekend is not about dwelling on the past. It is about building the future. It is about celebrating new beginnings. Her eyes swept the horizon towards the setting sun, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. This island, once a symbol of brittle, fleeting power, a monument to an ego, is being reborn. It will now be the headquarters for my foundation, a sanctuary dedicated to supporting emerging artists and entrepreneurs who value creativity over currency. She was rewriting history, erasing his legacy with a few effortless sentences and replacing it with her own nobler vision. Every word was a calculated demolition of the world he had built. He had used the island to project strength. She was using it to project purpose. The comparison was devastating, and he could feel the judgment of his peers turning on him. However, she added, and her tone shifted, the philanthropic warmth evaporating, replaced by the chilling precision of a boardroom executioner. New beginnings sometimes require the clearing of old debts, and in the world of business, as we all know, all debts must eventually be paid. Her eyes, like chips of obsidian, locked onto Sebastian's. He felt pinned by her gaze, a specimen under a microscope. For instance, Haley said, her voice now a clinical, dispassionate instrument. Some of you here tonight are investors in a company called Ethelred. My advice as a courtesy from your host would be to divest immediately. Their recent financing, the series of high-risk loans that have been keeping them afloat for the past 6 months, were not from a traditional banking institution. They were extended by a private equity firm, a rather aggressive firm named Orion Capital. A new wave of murmurs, this time laced with genuine financial panic, rippled through the guests. Several people, no longer trying to be discreet, pulled out their phones and began typing furiously. The name Orion Capital meant nothing to them, but the warning from the woman who clearly held all the cards was enough. But to Sebastian, the name was a death knell. Orion Capital was his lifeline, his secret savior, the anonymous entity that had given him the capital to stave off ruin. A cold dread, slick and oily, coiled in his stomach as he began to connect the impossible dots. Haley let him squirm in that silent horror for a moment before continuing. Orion Capital, as of last week, was acquired in a rather swift, hostile takeover by my own holding company, which means, Sebastian, that the 9-figure debt you thought you owed to a stranger you now owe to me." The crowd gasped as one. This was beyond revenge. This was a strategic masterwork of such breathtaking cruelty that it bordered on art. "I'm calling in the loan," she stated as simply as if she were ordering a coffee. "All of it. The covenants in your agreement are rather strict, as desperate men tend to overlook the fine print. I believe the default clause can be triggered by me at my sole discretion, and I am exercising that discretion. Effective tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m. Zurich time, your company will be in receivership. My people will be at your offices to oversee the liquidation." Sebastian actually staggered a step back, his hand flying to a nearby pillar for support. This was it. The end. Not just failure, but total annihilation delivered publicly by the woman he had tried to erase. Haley's gaze then shifted with chilling nonchalance to Victoria. And Victoria, your new lifestyle brand, a noble effort to remain relevant. Unfortunately, your primary seed investor, a small venture capital fund called Beaumont Ventures, has also just been acquired by a subsidiary of GM Enterprises. We will be re-evaluating all current investments, and I'm afraid a vanity project with no discernible path to profitability does not align with our portfolio strategy. Your funding will be terminated effective immediately. If Sebastian's ruin was a cannon blast, Victoria's was the silent, deadly slice of a stiletto. Her carefully constructed world of influence and appearances evaporated in an instant. The color drained from her face, leaving a pale, taut mask of shock and hatred. Having delivered her financial death blows, Haley's expression softened, but it was a change that brought no comfort. It was the prelude to the final, most personal devastation. But as I said, she repeated her voice now imbued with a quiet power. Tonight is about the future. From the shadows at the side of the stage, a door to the main residence opened. The estate manager, Catherine, emerged holding the hand of a small boy, no older than 5. He was dressed in a simple white linen shirt and trousers, his dark hair neatly combed. He walked with a child's unself-conscious curiosity, his eyes taking in the strange crowd. He walked straight to Haley, who knelt down, her entire being softening as she wrapped a protective arm around him. "I would like you all to meet the true owner of this island's future," she said, her voice thick with a love that was a tangible, fiercely protective force. "This is my son, Leo." Leo looked out at the crowd, his gaze unafraid. He had his mother's thoughtful eyes, but everything else, the dark, unruly hair, the strong set of his jaw, the determined shape of his chin, was pure, undiluted Devereaux. He was the spitting image of a younger, uncorrupted Sebastian. The paternity he had so publicly and callously questioned 5 years ago was now presented as irrefutable evidence to the very same jury that had witnessed his crime. The silence on the terrace was absolute, profound. It was the silence of a tomb. The social and emotional checkmate was complete. Every lie Sebastian had ever told about her, about their child, was laid bare for all to see. Haley stood up, holding her son's hand firmly in hers. She didn't spare another glance for the wreckage she had wrought. She didn't need to gloat or scream. Her victory was in her calm, in her control, in the simple, undeniable fact that she was standing there, whole and powerful with her son by her side. She looked at Sebastian one last time, and there was nothing in her eyes. Not hatred, not pity, not even the memory of love. It was the flat, dismissive look one gives to a piece of furniture, to something utterly irrelevant that is about to be removed. "Enjoy the party," she said to the assembled guests, her voice once again the gracious host. Then she turned her back on her former husband, on the woman who had replaced her, and on the entire life that had almost destroyed her. She walked off the stage with her son, disappearing back into the magnificent home that was now hers, leaving everyone else standing in the beautiful, perfect, and utterly ruthless world she had created. The party's ambient music swelled to fill the silence, but it couldn't hide the sound of a world ending for the two figures left standing alone in the center of it all. That night, Haley Monroe didn't just reclaim her name. She forged a new legend. Her story became a whisper, then a roar in the circles of the powerful, a testament to the fact that true strength isn't about the castles you build, but the ashes you rise from. She transformed Kalavinni Island from a monument of ego into a beacon of hope, proving that the deepest betrayals can fuel the most incredible transformations. Her revenge wasn't loud or explosive. It was the quiet, undeniable hum of a new empire being built upon the foundations of an old one's collapse. She became the architect of her own destiny, the queen of her own island, and a mother who showed her son that a person's worth is not determined by who tried to break them, but by how they choose to rebuild. What did you think of Haley's ultimate comeback? Was her justice served cold, or was it just right? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you've ever had a moment where you had to rise from the ashes, share your story of strength. We are inspired by resilience. For more stories of incredible twists and ultimate triumph, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs a dose of inspiration, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more compelling stories like this to you.